Record. Hello, everyone. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI. I'm coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group, where we talk about everything that Russell discussed in regard to the wave and its waveform as it relates also to our current topic, which is Alice Bailey's treatise on white magic. We are in Rule 5 today. And as people know that have watched this channel, I'd like to thank everybody who has watched the previous video. It really has got a lot of views and a lot of people have been interested in the topics that we're talking about. So thank you so much for those who have viewed, and I hope it's been helpful and been insightful for everyone who's viewed that. I'd like to also thank the group again for showing up and being consistent and taking the time to engage in this conversation, which I think is very important for this time in our current era. So as we move on, I'm sharing the screen. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah. Okay, so as everybody knows, I usually do a little collage for what we're going to talk about before we begin to discuss, to actually get some thought forms in our mind maybe about what we're going to discuss and get a mental picture of some of the ideas that we're going to discuss. And so as we said, we're going to start with Rule 5 today. I think we're probably going to spend maybe 3 weeks in Rule 5, just because it's very meaty, very deep, and a lot of information to discuss in Rule 5. Not that the rule is that intensive, but the background is. So with Rule 5, we have 3 things engage the solar angel. Again, the solar angel is the higher self for each individual. The way that Bailey talks is the solar angel is his higher self, the soul self, the one that actually connects what we call source. Walter Russell would call source. Some might call God. Some might call, supreme intelligence, whatever that is for you personally. And then the avatar on the ground, the person you see talking right now on the screen, is actually the personality, and it's manifest in the 3D on the earth. So the 3 things engage the solar angel before the sheath, and the sheath is us, of the one who thus creates, and steady contemplation. Thus are the heart, the throat, and eye applied for triple service. So with that, I have provided this, and for those that may not be aware of the chakras and where the chakras are in the body, we start with the root chakra, which is down at the base of the tailbone and even lower. Then we have the sacrum or sacrum. Then we have the solar plexus. Then we have the heart. Then we have the throat. Then we have the third eye. And then we have the crown. And for each of these chakras, we actually have their Ayurvedic names. And right now they're showing these colors. Now there's kind of some controversy on colors. Some systems show different colors for the different chakras. But for right now, we're just going to kind of concentrate on these chakras. And I've broken down these higher chakras, which are being discussed in this Rule 5 as the heart chakra, the throat chakra, and the third eye chakra. Now, each of these chakras are displayed as lotus petals in a sense. Bailey's going to get a little bit into the number of petals that she believes that these chakras have. But as you can see, these have distinct symbols also with them. And again, this is one, aspect of it. There could be many more aspects of it, but say within the heart chakra, we actually see the Star of David and different symbols and a triangle here with different ideas within the chakras of the words and the energies that are provided within these chakras. Again, this is not, laid in stone and is not of any science in particular. It's really just to show that there are correlations between the chakras, energy types, symbols, and number. Next, we have this idea here of a collective unconscious or a collective conscience. As Carl Jung was big on the collective unconscious, So were a lot of the other psychologists that came out of the Freudian movement with the collective unconscious and the collective conscious. And so far as that, we all have our own conscious, but we also are delve into the collective conscious and the collective unconscious as energy forms and dimensions and telepathic or sentience that dwells as we begin to manifest and as we begin to form community and form relationship with others. We begin to entangle. Sometimes it's called quantum entanglement. Sometimes we just talk about how these energy forms that we have become its own entity and its own sentient being in itself. The last area we're going to talk about here is some of Walter's work. We're not going to talk about Walter specifically, but we are going to talk about polarities. We're going to talk about negative polarity and positive polarity. This was a law that Walter Russell put forth, that in any wave, the inductive current seeks the high pressure at the apex of its cone of energy, and the conductive current seeks the low pressure at its base. And so with this, we see that the wave moving in this direction to the positive and preponderance, induction, then we have conduction, we have the negative. Positive conduction repels both, negative, positive, right? Negative, positive, negative, induction attracts. So induction attracts and conduction repels both. So this, we have so what he's saying here is at the end of these spectrums here, which is the apex of the waves, this is the intense pressure of high potential on both sides. So the highest potential is on the sides. Release pressure of low potential is at the 0 point. So the highest potential is as we reach these apexes. The release pressure of low potential is at the 0 point. So before I move on, any questions about the collage or comments? Okay.
I have one. Is there a special relationship, a geometric relationship between these in Russell's work? I'm looking for a 90-degree relationship, essentially.
Yes, there is a 90-degree relationship. And when you look at Walter Russell's work, that is called, I forget the name that he actually uses for that, but he talks quite a bit about that these are in a 90-degree relationship.
That's everything.
Okay. Okay, so any more comments or questions before we move on? All right. So here again is what we talked about, which is the rule 5. We're going to talk about 3 things. Engage the solar angel before the sheath of the one who thus creates. And steady contemplation, not meditation, contemplation. Thus are the heart, the throat, and eye allied for triple service. Again, we see this idea of the Trinity, the triple service, very strong correlations to many of the concepts in many of the different systems of theology and in other theories of philosophy. So with this, we're going to talk about the treatise on white magic, the soul and its thought forms. So what we're talking about here is the thought forms that are created by each individual and is put forth through our thought forms, and how we are going to do that through the manifestation and the transmutation using the body and the mind to do this. So as we start, we have been dealing with the process of creation as they concern. So the processes of creation as they concern the creator of a solar system or a planetary scheme. The ego. Now now when we talk about the ego, I have a definition down here. I'm going to go ahead and read that right now because before we get into it. So this is the theosophical definition of ego from Blavatsky. So this is not the Freudian or the Jungian idea of ego, or even from the root, which is the Latin root of self. So ego, Latin self, the consciousness in man, I am I. I am that I am is what Popeye said, right? That is the ego. Or the feeling of I am ship. Esoteric philosophy. So esoteric means inner philosophy, right? Exoteric is outer philosophy. Esoteric philosophy teaches the existence of two egos in man, not just one, but two. The mortal or personal, and the higher, the divine, and the impersonal, calling the former personality and the latter individuality. So, again, we've talked about this within Alice Bailey. We have the solar angel and we have the personality. So that's where we're seeing the personality. We're also calling this other maybe ego the individuality, the solar angel. One is mortal. So the sheath, the man that sits before you, that is mortal. It does pass away as time goes on through what Walter Russell would call, I forget the opposite of gravitation, radiation. We kind of expand out and begin to disintegrate. And then we have the higher, which is the divine and the impersonal. Okay, so we're calling this lower one, this first one, the mortal one, personality, and the later individuality. So as we begin to incorporate our soul more, we begin to have this individuality that is what makes each snowflake different, each fingerprint different, each of those areas of life different, is this individuality. Jung talked about individualization. We've talked about this a little bit. As people approach their 50s or so, they begin to individuate more and become more of their individualized selves. Those that seek the path, I do not know if we actually individuate if we don't seek that path, if we become unconscious and fall asleep. I think that some people do not individuate. They just become part of the collective unconscious. But again, that's for each person to look at themselves. So let's get back to number 2, the ego. As it creates its body of manifestation, it should here be remembered that the entire human family has been brought into manifestation by a paralleling group of egos. Man, as he creates those thought forms by which he expresses himself, through which he works, and by which he is surrounded, it should also be borne in mind that the definitive creative work is only possible to those who function on mental levels, the thinkers of the worlds and the disciplines of the masters. So as many of you know, and what we've discussed, and if you don't know, there are many aspects to the human. It's not just the physical body. There are other, what we call subtle bodies and different planes, as we've talked in biogeometry. Ibrahim Karim has talked about the planes of nature, which is from the Egyptian ideals. Within theosophy, we have these subtle bodies. So we have the physical body, the etheric vital body, we have the mental bodies, we have, the cosmic or astral body, and we have the spiritual bodies. So all these bodies are what form who we are. As most people only develop their physical and not these other subtle bodies, these are the bodies that we're going to concentrate on in the ideas of white magic, and we're going to concentrate on how they relate to the chakras. In every case, as we have seen, the objective form has been the result of meditation on the part of the creating agency, of response from the material acted upon by the force generated in meditation, thus producing the building of the form and its utilization through sound. So if you remember, we were talking about in the previous rules how we would sit and meditate, and then through the Om, or the idea of sound, we would then create these thought forms. This is succeeded by the stage wherein the form is seen objectively and becomes a vibrant living entity. Thus, in the Word made flesh, and thus do all forms, universes, men, and ensouled thoughts come into being. So here we're talking about, this is kind of a review of the previous ideas that we've talked about, of the thought forms coming in through being, through meditation, and through sound, which then creates vibration. Walter Russell says the foundation is love and the creation is through light. So through the light and through the sound, these thought forms are made real. And we're going to talk about, the vitality of the thought form. Is every thought form into existence, and does it last? Does it keep going? We're going to talk a little bit about what makes those thought forms vital and what keeps them in the presence within the 3D. Now, as we get into this a little bit more, these thought forms are going to be our creation. We are transmuter and divine creators in the world. What Walter Russell would say is that we are totally responsible for everything that we see, including weather, including anything within the 3D. And that's really a big responsibility once you understand that. But it's also a great gift that we can create our own world. We can create our thought forms. Now, we are going to get into how we do that as a collective in a little bit. Any questions before I move on to what the 5th rule touches upon? Okay.
I just want to make sure, so we all know that the cube is the thought form, right?
Yeah, the cube is correct. Going into the sphere, the cubosphere.
And the cube is the word. That's really where the thought is, because the linguistics are really important too.
Correct.
Yeah.
This 5th rule touches upon 3 factors which engage the attention of the creating agent before the physical form emerges into view on the exterior plane. These 3 are the condition of the waters, the safety of the one who thus creates, and the steady contemplation. We will deal briefly with these 3, and then we will consider the 3 factors which the discipline needs to relate if he ever aims to become an active and potent co-operator with the hierarchy. These are the eye, the heart, the throat. The interpretation and significance of these rules can be carried forward along several lines. For our purposes, the one followed will be that relating to the discipline, the disciple, and his work, and will deal with his training in the magical work of the ego, as the ego occupies and employs a physical form. These teachings are intended to be practical. They will emphasize the training and discipline of the disciple, and scattered throughout will be found these hints and esoteric suggestions, which, when followed, will lead the aspirant on the experiment and to experience of truth. Those who are not true aspirants will fail to recognize the hints and thus be preserved from danger and premature experience. So again, when we're talking about this, we're talking about this ego. Which ego are we talking about? There are 2 egos, right? There's the higher ego and the lower ego. When we're talking about creation, we're talking about the higher ego within these thought forms. When you see the word aspirant, that's also the disciple, that's us. As we look forward and try to incorporate this material into our lives. And I'm not saying that everyone should or that it is the best way to go, but it is a method, and there is value in what we're talking about here. It applies. I'm not saying that everyone should follow it rigorously, but that it does give us insight for how we can go about in this co-creation and begin to contemplate and really analyze how we can incorporate this material to become better manifestors, and also as a collective, creating a thought form that is more beneficial to our times. Okay, any comments or questions before we move on?
What is it that we're supposedly creating?
Well, again, the idea is that we are in contact with source, right? Just as we talked about with Russell. Through source, we engage the solar angel, which is our higher self, our higher ego. And what we are creating is what source would have us do. In our daily, in the physical, we would create something physical. So if we're unhappy with our current situation, I wouldn't say even unhappy, but if we don't believe that our current situation is from source, that it's being perverted by our personality, by our lower ego, then once we seek higher source to create these thought forms, and the idea is as aspirants or as disciples or as a group of individuals who desire to manifest together a world from source, It can't just be one person doing this, right? I mean,
It's
that's
not some physical thing, it's the energy around us.
well. I mean, the thought form does become physical.
Created, but
It can't. I mean, the thought form can become the plants outside. It can be the things we see. It can become anything that is in the 3D world, and that's what it can manifest as reality. Go ahead, Cosmo.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the meme component, what thought forms turn into, and egregors, and also ask in terms of the collective ego, what role? Because I do know that the outer dimensions actually influence these egos that are not our ego, are part of all this, because it's kind of a fractal relationship between them in terms of that role in it all, if there's context for that.
Yes, well, as in the previous slide, we talk about the hierarchies that all all egos that are brought into manifestation and our current individual lower egos are brought in by the collective hierarchies of higher egos.
And
So,
they're still doing that. They're still kind of experiencing these same energies as we are, just at different levels, right? So it's all kind of a fluid motion.
and this is something that Walter Russell doesn't really cover. He talks a lot about the waves and about energy and about knowing, but he doesn't really talk about these higher entities or higher egos. And so that's why I really like incorporation of this topic, because we're really getting into that there is great influence of powers on us, as we talked about in some of the first chapters of Bailey, where she actually talks about how we have, like I said, the atoms that turn into molecules, that turn into cells, and all these things are being influenced by planets, the solar system, each other, hierarchies, if you want to call them, angels, guides, whatever, masters. These are the energies that we bring in and that we manifest. We attract all those things to us, and we bring those into, because in reality, there's as many holes in us as there is substance, but we're holding it together in our vibrational, creating our own, tone, our own note, that we become a symphony together or a cacophony. And it's really our decision what song we want to sing as the collective. And right now our song is a little bit, melodious and not quite a symphony. And I think that the more we get people together to manifest, then that song becomes a symphony rather than just, a cacophony of different flats and sharps.
you're saying that the song comes from the collective, not from the smaller group that do this? Because that's what I see it the opposite. The collective is not going to do this. It's a small group.
The small group forms the collective, and again, the small group is not just us. The small group is all those hierarchies that are above us. Whether or not you want to call them angels or energies or spirits or gods or whatever. There are these other realms we talked about within these subtle bodies, right? And the spiritual realms. Each of these realms have their own sentient beings within them that produce and that influence us. And the more that we begin to realize this and understand that and work with those energies, the more we can manifest and the more we can actually work with source and begin to see a plan. And once we begin to see the plan, then we can actually begin to work with source to manifest that plan. And right now, as each individual gets too caught up in their lower ego, which is me, my, this is the current energies we're in, where I need more, I want more. This is a material age, right? It's all about me and mine. And as we move into us, and we, and, God-centered, soul-centered manifestation, we will begin to create a different world that is more not so centered on me and mine, but on what we can do to make the planet, the solar system, if there are alien beings, if there are these other things, how we can all benefit from the thought forms that we create.
Yeah, I don't agree. I don't think it's a collective also. I just don't, I don't see it.
That's fine.
Collective, you mean like 7 billion people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But isn't it that we are feeding this whole manifestation, and that we are manifesting anyway, whether we are conscious of it or not. It's just that when we're not conscious of it, we can be used by any other, let's
Right.
say, entity or group to direct our energy towards their goals. And the moment we start to be conscious of it and start to understand it through studying this material and other things, then we can become co-creator in the process, as in that we are able to then take responsibility for directing the energy in the ways that we want to support versus just being used.
Yeah, and the ways we want to support based on, knowing, right? As Walter Russell would say, on coming from source, So as we become more soul-centered, as the soul becomes in connection with source, right? This is like having a God-centered manifestation versus, a personality-centered manifestation. And these are each a question that each person has to answer for himself, right? Does he believe that these powers, that there is a plan, one, and, can I access that plan? And, and is that plan for the benefit of all those who are co-creating? And once we begin to understand this soul sense, that there is a higher purpose, what we call the higher self or whatever, that is going to manifest through the solar angels, we call it the higher ego, and through source, what would that look like versus what we have today, where each person is kind of manifesting on their own? The desire for power and for totalitarianism would go away. And we'd all see each other as being, and we're no longer just one, but we are all, but we do have this individual and individualization that keeps us apart and separate, but knowing that the goal is that it's for the whole as one, because we are the whole also. And to actually understand that and embrace that, that's kind of where we're going with this. But your comment, Matthew, we're going to talk a little bit about some of those energies that have come in the past. So let us therefore take up the three factors which engage our attention, and let us consider them from the standpoint of the human being who is creating thought forms, and not primarily from the standpoint of a solar creator or an ego, preparing to take incarnation through the medium of form. Two collateral thoughts are here of value. One is the process of creating thought forms is part of the work done by every aspirant, ourselves, in the daily meditation process. If the student would remember that every time he sits down to his morning meditation, he is learning to build and vitalize thought forms. His work might assume greater interest. The tendency of most aspirants, us disciples, is to be occupied with their deficiencies. So that is the tendency, is to be occupied with their deficiencies in the work of meditation and their inability to control their minds. Whereas both those aspects of their endeavor would be aided if they were to be occupied by the profundity, engrossing work of thought form building. So oftentimes in meditations, we try to get to a 0 point where our mind is just free, and we don't really have a purpose for our meditations, and we're just trying to see what comes in, and that's great. That gets us into knowing. But at some point, we might want to get into action. As Source tells us what it would like, or as through intuition, we begin to feel this energy of a higher purpose, of a higher source. How do we go about, instead of just worrying that we can't get to this nothingness thought, can we actually have purpose in our meditation to build these thought forms? That's where Bailey's going with this. And as Matthew talked about earlier, these other energies that come in. I know that you guys that were here for my series on spiritual sovereignty, which I did 4 videos on, we talked about the Spiritist movement. And the Spiritist movement, it is important to understand the occurrence of the Spiritist phenomenon in the emblematic year of 1848. As revolution spanned across Europe, in his book, An Edwardian Turn of Mind, Samuel Hines portrays English society between the death of Queen Victoria and the outbreak of World War I, a period embodying a dramatic struggle between new and old. Robert Elwood argues in favor of a sociological perspective on Spiritism, according to which social hierarchy and the influence of those in upper layers of society had the power to change the minds of the majority. Thus, Elwood compares the medium with a shaman or a magician, an occult leader who initiates others into a sacred reality, but also serves as a translator of that reality. So, as we talked about in the spiritual sovereignty series, back in 1848, in this period between the Victorian age and World War I, where a lot, of energy was brought in from Blavatsky to most of the material that we cover, including a little bit, Russell was a little bit before this time. We're talking Steiner, we're talking theosophy, we're talking Gurdjieff. I mean, these are a lot of these energies that have been kind of brought in at this time. And so what was happening? Well, there was a lot of upheaval. There was a lot of breaking down of the old. The British Empire was kind of on the decline in some senses. Their whole colonization of the world as we knew it at that time was beginning to fade. And we were getting a lot of upheavals of the proletariat, of the working man, of the masses against the powers that were in reigning that had become totalitarian over them. And as they became totalitarian, their hubris of their own power actually brought them down. And as this energy came in, which was brought in through mediums, and the idea of who was talking, what energy was being brought in, it actually turned into, they would actually have these things called turning tables. They'd put on these shows. It became very theatric. And then there's people that disproved it, but that nonetheless, there was an energy that was coming in. And no one really defined that energy. And it actually turned into more of about speaking to the dead than it was about speaking to these higher energies. And actually within our own country, Abraham Lincoln, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this because this pertains to the current Sovereign by Design class, among those enraptured by spiritualism, then boasting around 2 million members in the United States by the 1860s. So, this movement basically started in Europe in 1848. By the 1860s, there was 2 million members in the United States. And at the time, the United States did not have that many people in it. And so this spiritual movement actually was embraced by the First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, and the President himself, Abraham Lincoln. Now, what we have to remember is the Lincolns had a child that died, and they embraced this movement because they really wanted to contact this child that had died. But when they got into it, again, they accessed mediums, and they were trying to contact the dead child rather than contact the energies that may have been coming in. And again, this is for each person to evaluate on their own of whether or not we can speak to the dead or whether or not we can speak to other energies and other hierarchies and other dimensions. But Abraham Lincoln was, of course, honest and about his open-minded approach to spirituality, to the consternation of some. When it was reported in the Cleveland newspaper that he had consulted spooks on matters of state, so we have Abraham Lincoln actually, using these mediums during the Spiritist movement to contact the dead. Lincoln replied that only falsehood in the story was that the half of it has not been told. The article does not begin to tell of the wonderful things I have witnessed. So I don't know if Abraham Lincoln prepared himself or what kind of work he did beforehand, but what he was being shown was wonderful things that he witnessed. Now, the things that we have to realize is that within our own country, this is 1860. Within a few years, we were embroiled in a civil war of the North against the South. So these energies were, and again, is there a correlation between Abraham Lincoln's use of spirituality with what was going on in the nation. You know, it's saying here that in 1848, that this is when the revolution started in Europe. We now have a huge revolution, a civil war, not a revolution, but a civil war, which was a revolution against the Union by the South and wanting to break those bonds with manifest destiny and certain things. So do these powers, this gets back to Matthew's question, as these other powers influence us, are we prepared as a people, you know, as a governing class, to actually understand these energies and put them in a right context? And that's the idea, that in order to do this, we have to look to, instead of trying to maybe listen to the dead who are no longer here, we may want to consult those energies that are at a higher form within the hierarchy, understand the difference between the solar angel, right, and the personality, because what had died in Lincoln's son was the personality, and to actually begin to use a collective consciousness of those that wish to manifest these higher things rather than just consulting the dead, to bring in new thought forms that may aid in the turbulence of the waters that we're going to talk about here in a moment. Any comments or questions on the ideas of the Spiritist movement, Abraham Lincoln? Because the one thing before I finish up here, the War Powers Act, when you take the course on sovereignty by design, we get back into personal sovereignty. This was a time where most of the US citizens' rights were actually taken away. We talk a bit about the emancipation of the slaves, but what that generated was the bill, some rights that were designated as ours when we were already sovereign and free to begin with. And the state took that over, the federal government took that over and began to interpret what were our rights. And Lincoln actually put us into a state of war powers, which meant that we became enemy combatants against the United States, and we're no longer free individuals. So
Still are. It's still active.
Exactly, and that's because we're still under the War Powers Act, and this is where it started. And again, does that correlate?
You have to believe it though too. I mean, look at the media today. You can't say that, you know, because they said it. It's true. And it could be a little bending is all I mean.
And so, you know, was this energy, right, that we talk about coming in with the Spiritist movement in 1848, part of this whole, you know, generation of thought forms and of energies that actually begin to take away our freedoms because we didn't understand the energies? And that's, and go ahead, Matthew.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. That's why I didn't sound my voice. It occurred to me that with this Spiritist movement, that people were seeking, well, guidance or contact from the other side, from a perspective of the personality, the lower ego.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as we haven't integrated or connected properly the individuality with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's impossible to discern between any energy, to discern between different qualities of the energies that you're working with. And that may be very well the reason why it turned out into a dichotomous mess, you know, where everything was taken apart because people were playing with it without being able to take responsibility for it because they could never discern whether they were working with the right side or the wrong side, simply put.
And this is something that, you know, I think that Cosmic and I discussed regarding the dark journalist. You know, he talks a lot about this energy that, you know, came in and that we can't discern that. And as we move forward in our age, right, we have these new energies coming in. How are we going to deal with it? Because the industrial age started in the 1900s, right? I mean, this is the time the industrial age started also. It's kind of getting back to the ideas of Tolkien, right? With the orcs and, you know, the wheels and the machines and the fire and what they were creating. And so what did we create after this? You know, I talked a little bit that Blavatsky, I think the Dark Journalist talks about how the White Brotherhood at this time was trying to decide, should they bring in some of the occulted knowledge at this time because of what was coming before us. And so, you know, that was why the Secret Garden was written. The Secret Doctrine was written by Blavatsky, in which he brought out a lot of this hidden knowledge, this occulted knowledge, which is what all this that we talk about with Bailey comes from. I mean, she has a deep roots in theosophy and Blavatsky. So, you know, there was a lot of energy in it. And I think we also talked about in the spirituality sovereignty videos about that, you know, this is when the Ouija board by Parker Brothers came out in 1900 as a parlor game, you know, that people were, you know, trying to access the spirits. Who knows what the disc, so far as its little antenna that it had, what energies it was picking up, you know. Go ahead, Cosmic.
Yeah, I just want to add the Ouija board and what you're really doing when you're moving that thing around. You're pointing at letters. Those letters are numbers, right? To really get what that is all about at a very fundamental level. It's really profound.
Yeah, but the person using the board is not trained, right? They have not prepared themselves, and that's what I'm trying to say about Lincoln and all these other people. You know, I don't know what their preparation was before they started consulting these mediums, but unless, as Matthew said, we really begin to understand and are grounded and rooted in our solar self, it's very difficult to manifest what is coming into a purpose that's beneficial and aligned with source, as Walter Russell would say.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that in terms of the heart and where that energy really comes in and how before it gets out, because that's a big part of it, I think, is that these people that channel and everything, it doesn't come out what comes to their heart, right? It's something that it has to go through the language first, and it has to go through the astrology. Those are things that really change essentially whatever's coming into them, because it's not words, right, that comes into them, it's energies. And then they have to put it into words. And this, again, is where the thought forms and what language really is, how it distorts our very perceptions, because we don't really understand language. And what Babylonian babbling tongues is really about, why we have antonym, synonym, contronym, homonym, right? Those are distortions fundamentally. And I'd also like to ask about when you're talking about the personality as related to theosophy or Gurdjieff's 9 personality types in the Enneagram, is that anything that comes into this realm in terms of what you're talking about?
Within Gurdjieff, he was not a theosophist. He was, from what I understand, more of a Sufi. He came from, you know, a Sufi.
Okay, yeah, true.
So I don't believe that he was aligned with theosophy in the same way. In terms of, you know, when he used the term personality, again, it gets back to like what Jung and theosophy would say about ego or so on. So I don't think that personality, but the personalities that we're talking about coming through the 7 rays are different than the personalities that come through the Enneagram. That's a different system.
Yeah, but it's not. It's
it's similar, but not the same words.
Well, that's what's key really here in terms of words, right? And when we speak of Gurdjieff as it relates to theosophy, there's only one truth. And so he may use different words, right? And Sufism is centered around cycle too. So he uses different words, different influences. All of it really goes back to Vedanta, right? Because that's really the root of all of it. And this is what we all really should be talking about, is a Vedanta, not these versions of it that came from the Vedanta that are distortions themselves. And I'm not an expert in anything, right? But I do spend a lot of time trying to find primacy. What's the oldest source of all of this stuff? And I really do think that that's it. And so I just wanted to add that. Thank you. And
so, you know, as we talk about, you know, what's old or what's new, and, you know, the new energies and the interpretation of the new energies may be different from the old energies, and how we actually, as our consciousness evolves, may interpret those things differently as we move forward into an age of technology, how those technologies are going to change our views and our perceptions. And, Hegel, Carl Jung, and the zeitgeist. So there is this concept that is called the zeitgeist that was done by Hegel, is the spirit of the times. It refers to a form of supra-individual mind at work in the world and developed in the cultural worldview, which pervades the ideas, outlooks, and emotions of a specific culture in a particular historical period. And Carl Jung noticed his patients in similar recurring dreams of the devastation of World War II and also World War I before it happened. So as he would have his patients come in and they would relay their dreams to him, there was a lot of similarity into what they were seeing and what they were experiencing in their dreams, which Hegel would say was a zeitgeist, so a super individual of relating to or being an organism, entity, or complex of more than an individual complexity of nature. So when we talk about this zeitgeist being a super individual mind, it actually becomes its own being or organism within itself. Yes, go ahead, Cosmic.
Could that be considered the Adam Kadmon or the universal mind? Is that the same entity?
Yeah, a zeitgeist is more of for the time, not for eternity. So it's really kind of, it comes in and it becomes its own organism for that time. And like during the Spiritist movement, we could almost say that the Spiritist movement was a zeitgeist for that time, and how it was handled and the organism it became was based upon our input as creators also. And as Matthew noted earlier, if the world at that time was still materialistic, it brought in a very big spiritual component. But the reason for the spiritual component being brought in was that the hierarchies or the masters believed that we were developing our minds at a faster pace. We were developing, scientific materialism much faster than we were our soul selves, which led to inventions like the atom bomb being used against other people. All these different things which used these current, spiritual inventions, which really, the idea of atomic fission and fusion, all those things were really brought down from higher realms. But how we reuse them as a collective of humans is really, because we're going to have I believe, and it's been said, there's going to be a lot of spiritual enlightenment and ideas that are going to come into us regarding technologies and other things. If we are not prepared, and this was some conversations that we had when I was attending Stanford in AI, was really what is, our spiritual alignment and our ethics, regarding this AI and, how it was used. I developed cloud technologies and AI technologies because I really thought that the transparency and things that were involved would help and aid, our culture. Other people took that same technologies and things and used it for totalitarianism. So, just because we have technologies, those at the helm that control the technologies, if they're not, in alignment with source, they will go to personality and go into things that are not beneficial for the human race, the planet, the solar system, or anything else involved. So that's why, I'm very much, passionate about trying to find ways to develop the solar self, right? The soulness, the contemplation of source, so that we don't get in the same predicament we got back in the 1850s and pre-World War I now, because we face a lot of the same issues that they faced then. So, there is some good news. One of our friends within the alphabetic community, Dr. Edith Hibutu Chan, and she has a thing which she calls luminous kids. And what she says is luminous kids come on the planet already, knowing, and to help guide them, parents are going to have to go beyond the traditional homeschooling, which is far too limiting for them. It's time to understand how self-directed interest-led experimental learning is the foundation of the new paradigm. Some example of luminous kids activities that Dr. Edith Hibutu Chan has created are exploring wellness and self-care, body awareness, physical and energy anatomy, nature connecting and gardening, sacred geometry and vortex mathematics, cymatics, new biology, new science of water, blindfold perception, energy awareness and intuition games, consciousness training, e.g. spoon bending, telekinesis, nature and animal communication, following our passions, cultivating joy, kindness, compassion, and love for life. So Dr. Edith actually believes that there are children coming in today which are much different than any of us, that they have different energies, that they have different abilities, and that the parents that are conscious and those that are aware can actually help bring out these special characteristics of these children to actually help aid us in this new time. So she actually has a whole program for that. And if you're interested, you can go to her website at Dr. Edith Abutu Chan.
I mean, this stuff that's happening sure seems like, there's some energy that feels like it's you in your mind, but it's actually a negative energy. And that people are living on that, thinking it's themselves. I mean, it's the voices in your head thinking it's you, but it's not that. It's not you. It's actually Democrats.
It's many things. Go ahead, Gus.
Yeah, it's globalists.
Yeah. I just kind of want to add
that's happening, and I'm not just saying it as a joke.
Yeah, I just want to add you know who Gigi is? I know that the dark journalist that interviewed her. She's just wonderful. Watching a thing of hers last night from, I think, 2020, talking about parallel timelines and essentially bifurcations of timelines, and how that's really what we're in, 2 parallel timelines right now. And that's the key really to understand, is that both of these things are going to happen. And a lot of people, they think that it's going to be one outcome, and really it's 3 outcomes, because one is transhumanism, the other one's heaven on earth, and then that third option is the center, right? Because that's really everything I represent in terms of the heart, that's apotheosis.
I like that.
And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I really enjoy Gigi, and we've talked quite a bit about her in this channel also.
And that was great, though. I agree completely. What you just said, it's beautiful.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the conditions of the waters. Now, this is, again, these are recommendations for the aspirant, for the disciple, for us as we move forward, things to contemplate, things to think about. And, these are all meant to aid us in our manifestation and to allow us to actually get to that center point that Cosmic was talking about. And what we should look at, it's kind of the idea of Jesus and the boat and the waters, as he's looking, as Peter was looking out, and it was rough, once he took his eyes off and began to look at the waters, right, that's when he actually began to sink. So what does the condition of the waters mean? So it's the creating agency, man, has, through the incentives of a coordinating purpose, intent, meditation, and creative activity, built the thought forms which he is ensouling with his own vitality and directing with his will. This is what Walter Russell talked about also. He talked about will and desire. This time has come for the thought form to be sent upon its mission and to carry out the purposes of its being. As we saw in the earlier rule, the form is driven from its creator by the power of the expulsive breath. Right? Breathing out. This is a symbolic statement, but at the same time, an experimental fact in the magical work. In the disciple's work, there is often failure owing to our inability to understand both the esoteric, meaning the inner work, and the literal significance of the expulsive breath as he carries forward his meditative work. This expulsive breath is a result of a preceding period of rhythmic breathing, paralleled by concentrated meditative work, then a definite focus of the attention of the breath as the purpose of the created form is mentally defined, and finally the vitalizing of the thought form by its creator and its consequent energizing into independent life and activity. The condition of the waters is not that of a self-engendered whirlpool, but is more allied to that of a pool stirred into a frothy and boiling surge through the activities of others. There are many disciples who have achieved a fair measure of self-control and personal disinterestedness. They are not the victims of personality, desire, and aims, and are comparatively free from the whirlpool of selfish tendencies. But their astral bodies are again and again swept into a state of agitation by the group for and in which they work. They are elated or depressed, satisfied or dissatisfied by the results they achieve or fail to achieve. This achievement or lack of achievement and the steadiness of disloyalties of their fellow servers produces agitation and emotional upset. And on this powerful reaction, their thought forms constructed so diligently and prayerfully come to naught. Their skill in action is lost because they are tied to the desired result, and so their labor produces nothing. So, how much frothiness is there today in our world from outside sources? This is the whole cancel culture thing. This is Twitter. This is everything that has been brought forth in thought form into technology, into our reality, to cause dissension, right? To cause war, to just, rile us up, to get us into our emotional bodies, out of our, thinking bodies and contemplative bodies. And those that become disinterested in these things, knowing that they are passing, fleeting Maya, and that for us to concentrate on them is really going to hurt our abilities to produce the thought forms which we have so laboriously through contemplation and prayer tried to create. Because once we begin to, as we talked about this, Walter Russell talks about it as, the unconscious mind, the animal mind, the innate mind that, seeks to, we have scarcity. We're afraid we're not going to have enough. We're afraid that all these things are going to happen. And those who want totalitarianism know that if they can keep us in this place, we lose our ability to create. Go ahead, Cosmic.
Yeah, I just want to add in terms of the linguistics again, what you're speaking of as it relates to these narratives that we're all being subjected to, and how it relates to the etymology of the word government. It means mind control, right? To really get that part of it. But again, the linguistics are so important. All of these things that we're seeing, they're all narratives. They're all faith, right? And we create them. So they're essentially fueling our thought forms, and we're letting them do it through the lie and belief. And that's why the knowing is so important. And what we're really here for is to counter that. And I look at it all in terms of quality and quantity. Those are the two, the quality being the feminine, the quantity being the masculine, the quantity being, yeah, you come up with this invention, they always want to make a weapon out of it, right? Because it's always about control and more is that the quantity aspect, whereas better is the feminine, the quality aspect. And those two essences are in ratio, right? And that's really what everything is about, is that balance between another form of yin yang, but again, polarization and unification, right? That's really what those two things fundamentally speak to in geometric terms, and what this all started with, that part of it right there is a key. That was all, thank you.
So from anybody else, Matthew?
Yes, thank you. What you just said, Cosmic, I think once you see that, then it becomes rather irrelevant, because then you can negate it. Mm-hmm. So when we keep having these discussions and talks about it, that's actually for the people who don't get it yet, or don't realize that is what is happening. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, once you realize that, well, you just switch off the news and throw out the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I think with regards to that whirlpool, that story here, it's so important that what you're doing, William, for example, with developing your land, and also what I'm trying to do here is to try to create at least some spots where you can do your work in peace. You know, like you create a little private bubble or container in the whirlpool so that you can develop your skills and where you can connect with other sources and energies without being too disturbed too much to build up your strength and awareness. And then when you walk out of that, you start to immediately see these things and then you can just let them slide off, you know, like you're made from Teflon. And then you say, okay, thanks, but no, not for me. And then you continue with work. I think it's very useful to create also these spaces like developing a piece of land or a garden, or even learn how to properly draw a circle when you're starting to meditate or do your studies. I think these are very practical things, and then it will really help us to understand this material better.
What does drawing a circle do?
Sorry?
What is you said drawing a circle? What does that do for
Yeah,
you?
for example, before you want to do some meditative work or contemplation, to visualize drawing a circle of light, for example, around you that is meant to shield you from any disturbances or energies coming in while you are opening yourself up to learn and to understand.
Yes.
And yeah, that kind of like what the pagans do when they do their woo-woo stuff, let's call it that way.
I do this thing where there's like a light coming down and comes down through your head, goes all the way down to the center of the earth, and it comes back up, you let it stop right below you, and then it builds a thing, and then goes up over your head. I mean, it's really good.
Yeah. Like an umbrella, visualize an umbrella or a patronus.
Yeah, it's like a protection, a field.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to the circle element of it.
Okay, Cosmo, go ahead.
Is to understand the concave convex principle, and what the circle really represents is everything inside focuses back to the center. As it relates to, again, squaring the circle in Masonic terms is really key to understand that dichotomy or the duality between the masculine and the feminine. The circle is the monad, is God, and the masculine is the line part of it, right, or the linear part of it. But those two forms they're entangled and they're inseparable. Not necessarily as it relates to the cube, because that's outside. And why the circle is so important is because it's inside, and inside doesn't have sides, right? And that's really important, in my opinion, to understand the lack of sides in terms of polarity. And what creates the sides is where the thought really comes in is the toroid, right? Because a sphere does not have a direction, but once the axis of spin is established, that's when everything really changes. But yeah, the circle, that's the beginning of everything. So I think it's important to honor that aspect in geometric terms when we are doing, even if we're just contemplating it and not drawing it, but being in that space where everything is center focused. Because I don't look at, there's no outside, right? There's no higher levels. I see everything as the infinity is at the center. So all of the purity, all the outside really comes from that. And so above is not really, because a lot of our thinking is backwards, you know, and that's, if we can think in those terms, then we're being more correct as it relates to manifestation, to hold these principles in proper context. Because a lot of it, so much of it is given to us in obscured forms, and yeah, we need to really find it within ourselves. And I think that's the key of why that center is so important, is that infinity is inside you. Your skin is a unit boundary. It is the one, right? And you have an infinity within you, and nobody can argue with it, because at some point in your body, there's a center, and that's where it's at. And that's your heart, really. But to really get that concept of inside outness, that everything that we experience is actually coming from within, and that's where we really need to deal with it. And when we do that, everything that we deal with within feeds into everybody else. And like you said earlier, that changes how it gives them more potentiality to make the right choices. But it really is all that will and desire, is those two energies. Is the will is your purpose, the desire is the corporeal, and it's a battle between them, right? But both of them are really mirrors of unconditional love. And when we can look at it like that, and know that the words, right? Because they're both trying to talk you, the words are trying to talk you into and out of, but that other force is not words. And getting to where we can communicate with that other force and then communicate outward with proper words, I think is really the key to a lot of this that we're trying to.
And there's a story of Leonardo da Vinci being brought before the Pope at the time, and the Pope asking him to say, what is your concept of God, or what is your picture of God? And the story goes that Leonardo drew a perfect circle by hand and put the dot in the middle and said, "That's God. That's all I need to say." And so he understood it. I mean, this is not new information, right? This is, information that has come from Hermeticism for a long time. And as we begin to learn some of these practices and begin to learn that we are the infinity, that, as Walter Russell said that we have the ability to have omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence in ourselves. Once we get into this knowing, once we actually engage our soul selves rather than our, what he would call the electric mind, the electric body, the animal body, that we think is us, but it's not us, that we've been taught is us, but it's not us, and get back to the idea of who we are as divine beings, can we actually begin to create and get back to who we are and change our situation in this world today?
I want to add one more point to the circle as it relates, because the topic is the condition of the waters, is that's really what water is, right? Because water, the vortex or turbulence, let's say, is motion of water. And there is no motion of water that does not, just same with what Walter does with the electricity, with the conical flow. But the circle is it's the fundamental component of the vortex, right? And we're part of that too. We're just really small circles because we're closer to the apex, right? But we're all coming together, and that's how vortices really form, is they're micro vortices first, but they're all energetic, and those are really numbers, right? And those numbers, that's like 147 is really just 3, right? Because it's different vortices, but it comes together as 3, and that's what the root really is about, how number and why number is so powerful, and why it really is the spirit of aspire, right? Because you inspire, you aspire to do greatness, but it is the breath that all this happens through. And that circle, everything I'm about is the primary waters. Primary water is prime numbers, and it's coming, guys. Because I'm really big on that. My brother Russell's getting traction with Alpha Vedic and Inspired, and nobody knows about primary waters. And Walter Russell did, right? Anyways, I just had to add that because that's really important to understand that relationship. Yeah.
So the emotional body of the disciple, which must feed and nurture the baby thought form with its mental nucleus, is necessarily part of the planetary emotional form, and hence vibrates in unison with that form. This also should be carefully considered, for the emotional body is thrown into a state of activity by the general astral condition and must be handled wisely from this angle. In the place of fear, he must substitute that peace, which is the prerogative of those who live always in the light of the eternal. In the place of questioning expectancy, he must substitute that placid yet active assurance of the ultimate objective, which comes from vision of the plan and his contact with other disciples and later with the master. Desire for material possession must be superseded by aspiration for those possessions which are the joy of the soul: wisdom, love, and power to serve, peace, assurance, and right aspiration. So, again, this reminds me a little bit of Christianity, in which Jesus was teaching and talking about the kingdom of heaven, and where he was talking, and it's called the rich young ruler. And so this rich young ruler came to Christ and said, "What must I do to achieve all this?" And he said, "Give up all you have and follow me." And he walked away in tears because his possessions were great, is what the Bible says, and he did not want to give those up. When in reality, we own nothing anyway. It's all God's, and we're just stewards of it. So, these teachings go deep into all aspects and all religions and all teachings. So the idea that there are greater things in the world than possessions. You know, the Buddhists knew this, detachment from physical things and material things. But also to, once we actually have these aspirations, the joy of the soul, wisdom and love and power to serve. This is kind of the ideas of where we're trying to achieve so that we can better aid in the thought form development. Any questions before I move on from here? Or comments? Okay, Matthew?
Yeah, I just noted that it's not about giving up these material possessions. It's just that the desire for it must be superseded.
Exactly.
So you can live in great wealth and luxury and worrylessness in the material world if you already have acquired it. It's just something that replaces it. So
Yeah, it's really
it's not
the
exactly
idea.
like in the Bible that he has to drop it. Maybe that was just a test as a way of seeing how far he could go. But
The idea is how do you view them? How do you view the possessions, right? Because we do need people that can handle lots of resources and have lots of resources, can handle them.
Yeah.
But what is their connection to those? You know, do they believe that is their security? Do they believe that that is their happiness? Do they believe that that is their, you know, their life? Or is there,
or just a tool.
you know, and or is that, or are they stewards of those possessions to use their power to serve? And how are they hoarding all that, right? Or are they giving it away? Are they being generous, or are they being, you know, are they just trying to collect more and more? So a lot of it is the attitude, right? The attitude and the consciousness, the soul consciousness of that. That's Calvin.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, not necessarily off topic, but the element of when you're talking about ownership and as it relates to the metaphysics of the trust and the why, you know, again, back to the waters, that the legal system that we're under is law of the sea, is fundamentally the water. And what this SUKV Act of 1666 is in terms of our birth certificates, the monetary system, but most importantly, binding and that trust element of it, right? Because that's really, I think, what we want all of our belongings in, is not entangled with my being, but it's entangled with a different level of the matrix, right? It's entangled with the trust. So that there's a degree of separation there, because I honestly think that once you pass here, you take the knowledge with you, but the things, they actually potentially retard the capacity of that ascension or whatever you become next. Is again what you're saying too, but there's that law element of it too, because that's a big thing I'm part of in terms of the spirit of the law, because it goes right back to the breath again. The spirit of the law holds ultimate dominion over all of these things that people are doing to really get how number and sacred geometry is the first principle of all law through the inverse square law. That one right there is yeah, until we really get that, I don't think we really capitalize on our full power, which back again is in our DNA, which back again is in the water. So to really get how all this is wound around itself, you know, I think it's really important. Anyways, that was all.
Okay. So we're moving on next here to the safety of the one who thus creates. So the safety of the one who thus creates. It might be said here with emphasis, even if it is a recognized truism, that people are frequently slain in the occult and therefore in the more important sense by their own thought forms. It's like getting in your own way, right? Thought creation through concentration and meditation is a potentially dangerous matter. This must never be forgotten. There are forms of thought unencumbered by much desire matter, which, failing to pass downward, poison the man on mental levels. This they do in two ways. One, by growing so potent on the mental plane that the man falls victim to the thing he has created. This is the idea fixe of the psychiatrist, the obsession which drives to lunacy, the one pointed line of thought which eventually terrorizes its creator. Two, by multiplying so fast that the mental aura of the man becomes like unto a thick and dense cloud, through which the light of the soul must fail to penetrate, and through which the love of human beings, the lovely and beautiful and comforting activities of nature and of life in the three worlds equally fail to pierce. The man is smothered, is suffocated by his own thought forms, and succumbs to the miasma which he himself has engendered. So this is a warning here that if we do live in our electric body, our sensing body, and are driven by our desires of greed and lust and gluttony and envy and all these things, that as we begin to work on these thought forms, if we're not conscious of these, we can become greater manifestors of a negative, of a unhealthful thought form for ourselves, which then will multiply even greater because we are now more powerful. And then that will begin to encompass us and begin to be our downfall as we begin to concentrate on these things. We may enjoy some success and maybe some comfort in the interim, but in the end, it will devour us as these thought forms begin to consume us.
It can be summed up as be careful what you wish for.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think that is also why in the more modern magic traditions, they have this rule of three, that you have to always assume that whatever you do, you will get it back yourself in threefold. Mm-hmm. That I think it's a warning system to really become aware of what you're actually trying to manifest and trying to do in this work. You know.
And again, this kind of gets back to the idea that, you know, we as humans have elevated our mental state, you know, far greater than our spiritual state. And this was a concern at the time, as we talked about, I think, in one of the previous slides, with the White Brotherhood, with the occult, with the hierarchies, that they were seeing man really, you know, developing his mental plane much higher than the rest of any of the other planes, you know, the function of the mind over the function of the heart, throat, and third eye. And that's why we're getting into this point that this is a warning, you know, to be careful about, you know, when you start to create this mental plane, that you get this idea fixate, right, where you're fixed on one thing, and, you know, whether it's, you know, acquiring wealth or acquiring power or whatever it is you're doing, that you know, you become the thing you hate, in a sense, right? And because you become obsessed with that idea. Or again, there are lines of thought which draw forth from the emotional body a reaction of a poisonous nature. A certain line of thought is followed by a human being in relation to his brethren. It breeds hatred, jealousy, and envy, and works into manifestation in such a manner that it produces those physical plane activities which cause death of their creator. This may be literal, as in the case of murder, which is in many cases the result of crystallized intent, or it may result in disease. Pure thought, right motive, and loving desire are the true correctives of disease. And where the desire of these, which does animate many, is raised to constructive thinking, there will be the gradual elimination of disease. As yet, though many desire, few think. Let it never be forgotten that the great ones do not look for those who only desire and aspire. They look for those who blend with their desire the determination to learn to use their mental bodies and become creators, and who will work constructively toward these ends. Thus, it will be seen why in all systems of true occult training, the emphasis is laid on right thinking, loving, desire, and pure, clean living. Only thus can the creative work be carried forward with safety, and only thus can the thought forms pass down into objectivity and be a constructive agent on the plane of human existence. I just put a note here to see German New Medicine. This is some of the aspects within German New Medicines that are hermetic, as above, so below, that all thought forms, most disease relates from trauma within the other vital bodies, and then turns into a disease or a dis-ease within the body, and can be eliminated through the ideas that as we change our thought forms, as we change our perspectives emotionally. Can you hold a second here? I'm going to pause the recording.
Come in.
So as we were discussing about German New Medicine, part of the alphabetic family is Melissa Sell. If anyone really wants to investigate this topic further, she has her own website and information on that. Her name is Melissa Sell, S-E-L-L. So what we see here is that so much of our thought forms can influence, can destroy, as well as build, can cause disease as well as health. But that really depends on the right thinking. And for each of us, we have to kind of determine what that right thinking is for us. There are, ideas within this book of what right thinking is: love, compassion, gratitude, the ideas that build rather than tear down. And the idea is that once we get the mind right, all else will follow. The mind and the heart. God says that these laws are written on our heart. The heart knows. To try, instead of trying to figure out why we can do the things that hurt us and how can we make those things, help us, we may want to just look at our motives, because it's said that all things are legal, but not all things are beneficial, meaning that the world is open to us. We can do all things, but are they beneficial to the mind, body, and soul? So the last thing we're going to talk about here, I think we're going to finish up here. We've been into this about an hour and a half. Steady contemplation. You will note here that the word meditation is not used. The thought is a different one. The meditation process involving the use of thought and the mental building of the form so that it can be completed and rounded out and in line with the thought form of the disciples group or co-disciplines, co-disciples, and therefore with the plan, has been completed to the best of the man's ability. Now he must, with steadiness, contemplate that which he has created, and with equal steadiness, inspire it with needed life so that it can fulfill its function. He ceases to reason, to think, to formulate, and to build in mental matter. He simply pours his life into the forms and sends it forth to carry out his will. Just as long as he can complete and hold steady, so will this creation fulfill its intention and act as his agent. Just so long as he can focus his attention on the ideal for which he created his thought form and can link the form and the ideal together in one steady vision, just so long will it serve his purposes and express his ideal. Herein lies the secret of all successful cooperation with the plan. We will now study for a while words, heart, throat, eye, for they have a peculiar significance. These three form the apparatus to be employed by all disciples during the world cycle, which is so rapidly coming. In all truly esoteric groups, there should be forming a group in which an intellectual understanding of the mechanism of heart, throat, and eye will be found. It should be constituted of those who are submitting themselves to a discipline and a training which will make its use a demonstrated fact in nature to them. I would call attention to those words and request their careful study. So again, this is one thing that we're kind of trying to accomplish within this discussion group, that we as disciples or members or whatever you want to call it, friends, family, are looking to develop thought forms that are beneficial to this time. As I've said in the past, I cannot buy enough guns, bombs, planes, and whatever to, again, do I think that's the solution? I do not think our solutions lie in the physical. They lie in these spiritual planes, since we are co-creators and create and transmuters of energies. So as divine beings, my call forth is that we begin to create what they're talking about here, an esoteric group, that we're forming, which an intellectual understanding of mechanisms of heart, throat, and eye, but also of that we do have, that they understand that we have this ability. But it is work. It's not something that, you know, we can just do by thinking, because when we're thinking, our thought forms can be our detriment, as talked about earlier. It's also a development of our spiritual aspects and of higher source and higher knowledge, and a desire to do what we believe is the plan from source, from a higher purpose. So any questions before we wrap up here on today's discussion? Okay, so with that being said, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River Valley with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. Thank you all for attending. For those who are watching, please like and subscribe. Only about 30% of my viewers actually subscribed. So please do that, and also comment things that you like and things that you disagree with, so that we can get a better understanding of the collective and what they are experiencing. So again, thank you all. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.